Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the second talk of the series of Artex Talks 6th edition. My name is Aude Christemba, and I am invited curator at Artex Lagos 2021. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our three panelists to this conversation titled The Power of Archives and Its Limit. Before moving to the readings of their bios, I would like to express my gratitude to each of them for accepting our invitation and for making some time during this special day of the weekend, which is a Saturday. I'm pretty sure some people are maybe prepping to go in nightlife at the moment, but really thank you for making the time to be with us and to share with us. This evening, we are joined by Kelani Abass, Bonaventure Soh Bejeng Ndikung, and Emmanuel Iduma, who will be moderating this conversation. Kelani Abass studied painting at the Yaba College of Technology, Lagos, graduating with distinction. He has participated in several international residencies and workshops, including Mart Fabriken, Ebotov, Denmark in 2022, Headland Center for the Arts, San Francisco, California, 2018, Salzburg International Summer Academy of Fine Art, Austria in 2014, and History Matter Center for Contemporary Art, Lagos, Nigeria in 2012. And Kelani is one of these artists. I mean, you can definitely Google him to have much more information about all the past events he has participated to. His recent work explores the importance of material inheritance and interrogates the quality sense of past and present. The work seeks to make a statement about the future that conceals the interdependence of different moments in time, employing painting, photography, printing, and archival material to highlight personal stories against the backdrop of social and political events, which also engage time and memory. This undertaking is illustrated in colonial indexicality, part of the re-entanglement colonial collection and in the colonial time exhibition at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, Cambridge, currently showing until 17th of April 2022. Dr. Bonaventure Soh Bejeng Ndikung is an independent curator, author, and biotechnologist. He is the founder and artistic director of Savvy Contemporary in Berlin, and is the artistic director of Sansbeek 2020-2024, a quadrennial contemporary art exhibition in Arnhem, the Netherlands. He's artistic director of the 13th Bamako Encounters 2022, a biennale for African photography in Mali. Dr. Ndikung was the curator at large for Adam Chemchik's Documenta 14 in Athens, Greece and Kassel, Germany in 2017. A guest curator of the Dakar Biennale in Dakar, Senegal in 2018, as well as artistic director of the 12th Bamako Encounters in 2019. Together with the Miracle Workers Collective, he curated the Finland pavilion of the Venice Biennale in 2019. He was a recipient of the first OCAD University International Curators Residency Fellowship in Toronto in 2020, and is currently a professor in the Spatial Strategies MA program at the Weissensi, I hope I pronounced it well, Academy of Art in Berlin. And from 2023, he will take on the role of director of the Haus der Kulturen der Welt, HKW in Berlin. Thank you both Kelani and Dr. Bonaventure to join us. For our moderator, Emmanuel Iduma is the author of A Stranger's Pose, a travel memoir longlisted for the ASL Ondaatje Prize. His essays and art criticism have been published widely, including in the New York Review of Books, Aperture, Art Forum, and Art in America. His honors include a Creative Capital Warhol Foundation grant for art writing, the inaugural Irving Sandler Award for New Voices in Art Criticism for AK USA, the C. Berlin Talent Prize for Theory, and the Silvers Grant for Work in Progress. I Am Still With You, his memoir on the aftermath of Nigerian civil war, is forthcoming from Algonquin, I hope I pronounced it well, maybe you correct, US, and William Collins, UK. And you can check the website, his website, mrduma.com. Thank you. And before I give the floor to Emmanuel, I would like to say to the audience that you can prepare your question. We will have a 15-minute Q&A, and please don't forget to precise to who you are addressing your question. Thank you and have a good conversation.
Thank you. It's an incredible honor to moderate this conversation between Kelani and Bonaventure, whose work I have followed for quite a while, and I'm just thrilled. I mean, I get to ask the questions and they get to respond. So I feel like I have the easier part of tonight's event. So I'm not sure how many of our listeners have seen the exhibition, which is sort of one of the central exhibitions at ArtX. And I hope you can get a sense of it. I think we'll put some images now, some of the images from the walk. You get a sense of the exhibition. And if you're in Lagos and you haven't seen the show, I would really encourage that you check it out either later today or tomorrow. So to attempt a simple overview, which I hope is not simplistic, the exhibition is titled Unfolding Layers of Time, and it has 3 main elements. So there are 8 mixed media paintings, 8 letterpress typecases, and 2 letterpress machines, all of these working in varying ways in the exhibition. And Kelani has drawn from his family archive in producing this new body of work. The paintings and the letterpress typecases contain some of the photographs that were used in his family or from his family printing press. Later, I'll let Kelani speak about the vision behind this new body of work. But for now, I think it suffices to say that it's a brilliant crystallization of the work he has been doing for several years, both with his family archive and his work as a painter. And if you can't make the physical fair, I would really encourage that you spend some time with the images online. So the title of this conversation is The Power and Limits of the Archive. And I think that it suggests that we can speak both of the possibilities of archives as well as the constraints that we might have while working with, alongside, in response to them. And my task is to set up a dynamic conversation between Kelani and Bonaventure. Kelani as an artist, Bonaventure as a curator and as a thinker, both within and beyond even the scope of their practices. As you know, there's just a lot to say about archives. There's a lot that has been written. And my hope is that we can both crystallize the essence of what archives could be, especially in the practices of both Bonaventure and Kelani, but also just propose ways of thinking about archives that are peculiar, even idiosyncratic. And I hope there's enough time for what I imagine would be a wide-ranging conversation. And I also hope we'll have a lively conversation with the audience, at the end. So prepare your questions for either Bonaventure or Kelani. So I would like to begin with statements of definition and scope from both of you, Kelani and Bonaventure. And how do you define the archive in your respective practices? And how do you work with it? So we can begin with Kelani and then go to Bonaventure.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. I really appreciate it. Yeah, personally, I see archive as a medium to navigate time. In my practice, it has ability to take us through the past, the present, and again, the future. So because of my background in letterpress printing, I totally have the knowledge of how to manipulate all forms of archival materials. I like the power that the technology has given to archive, which allows me to use them in diverse ways. I can do a lot with it because of the new technology that I can take them through, and I can use them in a lot of ways.
First of all, it's a pleasure to be with you guys. Thank you for the invitation, Aude, and thank you, Emmanuel and Kelani, for this opportunity to talk. We could talk about anything, by the way. It just so happens that we need an excuse to get together. And if it's with the archive, then let it be the archive. So I don't know really, if there is need to define it, because the question is really, how to stretch the existing definitions of what the archive could possibly be, right? So in my practice, I have tried to look at tangible archives, but also tried very hard to look at intangible archives. I have tried to look at archives that are institutionalized archives, but I've also tried to look at archives that are more the archives of the people that are not made from certain institutions. I like the idea of that tool to navigate time and spaces. The archive to me has become, the pillars, or I would actually say our bearings, how to situate ourselves, what we need to be able to situate ourselves could possibly be the archive. That said, I acknowledge the fact that it is not a concrete definition, and I actually don't want a concrete one. But we can talk about a few examples of how, of what those archives could possibly be, and how to rummage such archives, and how to unpack them. And of course, with the very important question of accessibility, who has the access to certain archives, even if you find yourself within them, doesn't mean you have access to them. Who is in the archive, by the way, whose histories are told within archives, and then how do we also think of different formats, or how archives manifest themselves. So the body as an archive, sonic archives, and so on and so forth, so that is what I'll be interested in talking about.
Thank you so much. We've drawn the title of this talk from an essay by Achille Mbembe, as Aude recommended. And he writes in that essay, and I paraphrase, that regardless of how we define archives, right, regardless of, in Bonaventure's thinking, stretch what is possible when we think about archives, they have no meaning outside the subjective experiences or subjective experience of the individuals who at any given moment come to use those archives. And we can, quibble with that if we want to. But this subjective experience, he says, is what places a limit on the supposed power of the archive. And so given this, I would like for both of you to speak about subjectivity in relation to your use of the archive, right? The very wide and broad notion of subjectivity, even vulnerability in relation to your use of the archive. For Kelani, I imagine this will have to do with working with your family and community archive. And for Bonaventure, perhaps you can consider this in relation to some of the kinds of archives that you've worked with, bodies as archives, sonic archives. And also I'm thinking of, in your case, colonial neighbors, the curatorial project that you worked on, investigating the colonial history of Germany, right? So very broadly, also as a way to introduce our conversation, how would you speak about subjectivity in relation to the archive? Kelani.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for the questions. I think for me, I would like to see in the area of the copyright. I think as an artist that work with archive, most of the questions that people frequently ask me will be concerning probably the copyright. How do I do it when someone just walked up to me one day and say, the person in my work is his mother, or is a photograph from someone in his family? Because most of the images that I use there are probably the ones that most of our clients brought to the press for us to use for the work. So that puts a bit of restriction on how I source my materials, which limits me to just using materials from my personal archive and some institution archives, as well as one collected from friends. Regardless of what that implies, I believe archives still retain its power and allow the user to stay original in a way by sticking to what only belongs to them, or what is assigned to them for use, probably through an institution, through the collections of their family, or through friends. So that's what I think.
Just before, I think it's fascinating to hear you speak about the questions of copyright, which I think leads to or reminds me of what Bonaventure was saying about who is in the archive, whose histories are represented in the archives. And perhaps that could also form one of Bonaventure's responses here.
Yes, but before we get to that, I don't really know if I agree with what Achille said about the subjectivity of the archive, because I don't remember that text, and I would like to get back to it. I will have to see the whole context, but I think that archives, of course, are read in relation to the subject, because we make relationalities, right? But archives are always beyond the subject. So if we think of the colonial archive, for example, it is not just the way it impacts the subjectivity, but the way it impacts the whole, the way it functions as, within a certain framework of objectivity, even though it might not be objective, but it functions beyond the subject itself. I would like to think of, let's say, the archives that are slowly opening up of the killing of the Algerians in Paris in the early 60s, the throwing of the Algerians that protested in the Seine and so on and so forth. What impact does that leave on the society? Not only on the society of the perpetrators, but on the society of those that are the victims. Okay, we can look at the archives of the Holocaust. We can look at the colonial archives even before, what impact does that leave on the society beyond the subject itself. And this is an institutional impacts. So I don't know if I understand what the question actually is, but I think that the archive is evidently beyond that. If we look at the ethnographic museum as an archive, so to say, as an archive, or an archival space in which the author is constructed, then the only way you can read that author is through what is being portrayed within that archive, right? And that it is not read within a specificity, but an overall, right? So it is a definition. So if you go to an ethnographic museum that says this is Oceania or this is Africa, then this is how it is supposed to be read, So it goes, especially with that broad brush, across a whole continent, a whole people. So I am not very sure about the subjectivity of that. Maybe I need to read the text in detail to be able to understand what was actually meant. That said, that question of access is, we could also use the example of that ethnographic museum or any archive for that matter. So the information that is gathered and that is kept within a particular place, who has the privilege of choosing that, who has the possibility of defining what is placed there. And then the question is, who has the access to get in there actually to use that archive? So I've been working with or interested in an archive in Berlin, like many other curators and artists, I imagine, that is called the Laut Archiv. And the Laut Archiv is a sound archive that was created at the turn of the century, 19th to the 20th century, made up of mostly recordings, So it's a sonic archive of voices. So people that had been gathered from different parts of the world, that were in Berlin or that were in the colonies, were asked to say something in their languages, and that was collected. And you have this incredible amount of, say, information out there. Now the question is, what issues of consent to get into that space? Who could say something and who couldn't say something, And until today, who has the possibility even of knowing that such an archive exists and who has the possibility of going in there to work with that archive, So these are many levels of, that question of accessibility, which you brought up again.
Thank you. So I want to give Kelani an opportunity to sort of elaborate on his practice for the audience. In the first place, I'm curious to know how your practice as a painter, your work as a painter, informed how you began to use these photographs, right, from your family archive or from your family printing press. Because as an aside, we can also, I guess, interrogate that question of whether this constitutes an archive, right? Whether these images that you're working with, in the sense of how we can define archives as institutions of the state, whether this constitutes an archive or what kind of archive it is, but that's an aside, right? What I'm curious to know in the first place is how your background as a painter informed the work you began to do with these photographs. And then also you can just speak to how you came to begin this work in the first place. And then if you want to then extend that to talking about the work that you made in the fair, or for the fair rather.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. So I'll start by giving just a bit of my background here. I was born into a letterpress company business. My mom was a typist and my father a printer, which they started the business in the early 50s, going into the 60s, the period that Nigeria was gaining independence. But I left home in the year 2000 to Lagos. So in 2010, when I went back, I returned home, I realized that most of the archival materials left behind by my father was getting damaged and thrown away by some of the family members because they felt they were no longer useful because of the advent of technology. So immediately I saw the need for me to take custody of those material. And I realized that the best way to preserve it or to preserve them is to integrate them into my practice. I believe with that, more and more people will have access to them, which is better than just storing it in a place that will probably limit their visibility until probably someone will see the reason to discuss them, to discard those materials. So that's actually what informed the reason why I use these materials. So going into the Artex project, I present 3 body of works. The first one is titled Impressions. So I would like to elaborate a bit about that. Impression is an interactive piece which is inspired by the idea of one of those archival materials that I got from home, the Adana letterpress machines. So the quality of print is determined by the individual striking its impressions. What I mean by that is the quality of print in letterpress printing, the result of the print is determined by someone who is printing it. It's not like a digital form of printing where the machine controls everything, including the result. The more you strike, at times the better, or the better your impression. So I'm inviting my audience for this exhibition to practically use this letterpress, which automatically signifies their state of mind. The quality of impressions that the print generates determine that state of mind. So what I mean by that is when you strike a print, and what I do is I take it from you, look at the back, and look at the amount of impressions that your print generates. What actually informed that is growing up in the letterpress printing. My father will ask us to run job for clients, and before you go on with the client's job, you have to run the proof, and you take it to him. And the first thing he will do is to turn the back, check the amount of impression. If you have too much of impressions, my father believes your mind is not stable. Then we have to look for someone else from the family who has a stable mind that would go and run the impression. I have a better impression. And again, I think it's quite right, because anytime he called me to go and do it, to go and run impression, and I'm not in a good mood as at that period, all the things that I ran will just be a bad print. But if you ask me to go and do that when I want to probably give a gift to my girlfriend and I need to make some cards, and I have fantastic print, the results always come out very, very nice. So that's what I bring to the space, to my audience to try that. With that, I can actually tell them what the state of their mind is, especially looking at what we've been through in the past few years when we talk of pandemic and the political unrest in Africa in general. So there is need to check our mental state. That's one of the importance of that body of work.
Yeah, I mean, I want to give Bonaventure a chance to respond to, I mean, Kelani's use of, I mean, the work that he's making for the fair, and whether in a broad or specific manner. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to respond very briefly by saying that I think it's brilliant work, and this concern with the archive is something we share. And it seems to me that a lot of the problems we have is really come from the inability to value the existing archives and to find use and to actually be able to repurpose them. And I actually also like the way you make this connection between, to think about the effectiveness of the archive, the impression. So I really appreciate that. I wanted to think of the many archives because, Emmanuel talked a lot about, mentioned the definition and, if this is even an archive, because the idea of the archive is always, very much associated with, official bodies, what I call, the institutional archive, obviously because in the etymology of the word, in the Greek arche, you have the idea of government or governance in it, But again, archaea, means public, so, if the archive is a place where records are kept, then it doesn't necessarily have to be the government. It is your family, it is the community, it is your body, it is, it is the record shop, it is, the kitchen, and so on and so forth, so because records are kept in those places, So I like the way you take upon that family business, the archive, to be able to, to extrapolate from there, to be able to think of the condition, actually the well-being of the continent at large and beyond that, which is something I appreciate very much. And looking also at other works that, of yours, or series that, at least the ones I know of, casing history, which I find very important, not only in the idea but in the form. Not only in the content but the container. So how that content is being formed by the container in which it finds itself. So reframing histories. Actually creating the sections of the whole, fragmenting histories, placing them within these cases, and a bigger image is actually, cut into parts, and you can see it there, or several other fragments are placed together to be able to tell a larger history, and it is in that act of the composition, because the archive actually makes sense because of the composition, because the archive is a narrative tool. It is not only what is placed in the archive, but what is put in relation to the other in the archive that actually makes the archive important.
Thank you so much, Bonaventure. Prof. In addition to what you said about casing history, I would like to elaborate it more by telling us a bit about the starting point for the work. So I know a lot of us know what the cases are. The cases itself is an archival material. It's something that we can compare to keyboards, the computer keyboards. If we know the letterpress printing, you know, that's the earliest form of printing, where all those tiny types were kept, the things you pick. Then we have to pick it one by one before you can even say you want to print a document on an A4 sheet. You have to spend closely like 3 days to a week to complete that, just to put a letter on an A4 sheet by picking all those types one by one. But today, that's not necessary. Thank God for technology. All those stress, they've been taken away by technology. So now, those are not used for that purposes anymore. Then I actually changed the use of the cases by installing those photographs from the family archive. Remember, most of those photographs are the ones brought into the press by especially people in my community, probably to run an obituary, to do an autobiography, to do an almanac, to calendar, and they come with the photographs, and we use it, and it becomes the material for the press. So in doing so, I try to paint with time. What do I mean by painting with time? If you look at images of, say, 1940, plays against the one of 1950, 60, 70, and you carry both of them, the four of them together, you experience, you see the trajectory of time in them. Some are more paler than the other. For instance, the image of 1910 is paler compared to the one of 1960 or the 1980. That now becomes the tone of my palette, becomes my paints. By just supposing all of that together, what I do is to photograph them and manage to retain the color quality and the image quality. But by just supposing them in that case, which turns to my canvas. Then again, what I've managed to do there is to pause time, to stop time at that moment. By the time I rephotograph them, put them together inside the case, the time starts again from there. What I mean by, in essence, is that from today, when you have the case and you put it on your wall, and you take photograph this year, and the next 5 years, and the next 5 years, and you put all of those images together, in the next 10, 15, 30, 50 years, you know, definitely you will see, again, the trajectory of time in terms of the equality of that image. I'm not sure if Emmanuel...
Yeah, go ahead. No, I mean, I just want you to wrap that up and then I'll ask them. Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, it's another way of stopping time, of pausing time, and stop it, fix it at a spot, and start again. You know, the technology that we use in that time, in the 1910, it's been tested. We know what that can be. But today, all the photographs we print today, we don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, the people that make the machine will tell you last 100, 50, 60 years, but we are not really sure. It's just an experiment. So that's one thing about the casing history again, adding to what Bonaventure said earlier.
Yeah, so I want us to turn to I guess a foundational question. I think Bonaventure has already started alluding to it, which could help us understand the stakes of any archival practice on the African continent, which is that for us, I mean, speaking about Cameroon, speaking about Nigeria, for instance, you know, the archive as a material entity, you know, especially when you're speaking about it from a government or state perspective is either non-existent or poorly managed, right? So to rummage in the archive, so to speak, is almost to, if I could say that provocatively, invent the archive itself, right? So if we start thinking about this, right, the material existence of the archive, right, and its unavailability or its poorly managed states, what are the implications of this, right, for artistic or literary practices? One implication could be that we begin to think about archives such as the one Kelani is working with, and to broaden our understanding of what archives are to, as Bonaventure was saying, to include anywhere records are kept. So the question then becomes, what are these records? What can constitute the record? And how can we explode the meaning of a record? But I don't want to preempt you too much. I'll give you the wide berth.
If I may, Kelani, you want to go first? Okay. It's very important that we don't get stuck, you know, in the shenanigans of the governments and, you know, their inabilities, whatever, you know. I mean, that is the old story. The new story is that we have to find other ways to continue doing what we have to do, which is to say that, after all, we are the government. After all, we are the public, you know. So if we're waiting for the government to to be the creator of archives, then we'll be waiting for quite a long time, you know. So what I've been interested in personally is to go beyond that, you know, to go to my village, for example, and think of fabrics, for example. So if you look at the indigo fabrics made in the whole grass field area of Cameroon, going as far as Nigeria, called the Ndop, indigo fabrics, and the forms that they take, you know, they use the tie-dye technique to create incredible cartographies, incredible forms of writing, and actually, essentially, find ways of capturing memories. You can call it histories or whatever, but have them in the fabric. So basically, what we also do is to wear our memories. So how can this become spaces? How can we actually understand these as archival spaces, you know, where records are actually kept, you know? So you can look on the Ndop fabric and you would see the space. You could also see a genealogy, you know, your family lineage based on the kind of, you know, formal structure that is on the Ndop, you know. And you can see many other things, you know, exactly because it is, because they use certain iconographies, you know, that would permit you to get into larger histories. So I'm interested in this, you know, and I mentioned that en passant in the last answer when I was talking about the kitchen, and I was being very serious about that. How could we actually imagine the kitchen as the archive, you know? So if you say, what does it mean to eat egusi and powdered yams, you know? So with all the stories we know about the yams, you know, with all that has been written, we know all that we know about the Yam Festival, what does it mean? You know, so how can that space also be considered the archive, right? So there is a necessity, in my opinion, to avoid getting stuck with these issues of governments and so on. Of course, you know, it goes without saying that we have to hold our governments accountable, you know, for the misdeeds. It is very important that artists, especially, move beyond that and engage in the business of creating new archives, other archives. You know, I wrote an article a few years ago on something I call the apoptotic archive. You know, apoptosis is a term in the sciences in which a cell, kind of self-destroys itself to be able to create space for others to exist. So I wanted to think of, apoptotic archives as possibilities of archives creating spaces for others. So if the archives that are meant to be done by the governments, or that are created by the governments cannot do the work they have to do, then they have to make way for others, in that process of apoptosis, because they would self-destroy. It's very interesting because it's actually natural, because most of them have become redundant because of that process of apoptosis. So the question is, what other cells grow beyond that? So that's what I'm interested in.
That's incredible. I think that what you are saying is, how can we reclaim the archive from almost these parochial forms of considering them, right? And to liberate the archive from any sort of like narrow thinking about what it could be. And I'm thinking also, for instance, that when you speak about the body as an archive, right? In my hometown, there's a certain form of naming, right? So the first son is named after the grandfather. The second son is named after, that's the paternal grandfather. The second son is named after the maternal grandfather. The first daughter is named after, and so on and so forth, right? And so when I tell you my name in my hometown, you can almost already imagine, if I am the second or first son, what my grandfather's name was. I think in particular, because we have always, especially after colonialism on the African continent, been asked to imagine what our past could be, right? And so it's not, the past in relation to the African context, I believe, is not necessarily defined In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. It always has to be in some ways regenerative, thinking about what the past could be, never only what the past was, right? And looking for language in which we could always define the past, which makes me sort of think about another question for Kelani, which is, how do you balance the notion that, say, people come to see the show and think about, oh, this is nostalgic? Because as I said to you yesterday, I saw someone respond to the work in that way, which I don't think is necessarily problematic or even wrong. But I think that what you're thinking about is beyond the question of nostalgia, is beyond the question of the past as nostalgia, so to speak. And so how do you respond to the fact that what you're doing is not simply revisiting the past or even reinscribing the past, but proposing something beyond that? I think we are almost running out of time because of the questions, but yeah. If there are any questions.
Yeah, let me just quickly answer that question. If you look at my work, especially the cases, well, what I think the cases does, because from the audience too at the fair, I got a lot of questions where people will go there and say some of the images in the cases looks like someone that they know, or looks like their baby in the house. And they take photographs and say they want to go home and show that to their family, to their kids. But let's leave that apart. But looking at what I said about technology, I'm looking at it from that direction, in which, we've known what the past technology can do. We've known when we print an image in the 80s, we know the quality, and we know the result. We know what will come out of it. But what we print today, we actually don't know. Yes, we know the quality, but we don't know the timeline. We don't know what happens to it in the next 10 years. That's looking forward. That's psychology. Yeah, we can only say nostalgia. We have to look forward. We have to see what are these things saying, looking forward, especially looking at the process of the work.
Thank you, thank you. We have some questions, and I'd like us to begin to respond. So there's a question for Kelani, and there's a question for Dr. Bonaventure. So let's start with Dr. Bonaventure. Fascinating perspective on sartorial archives, it says. It would appear that in comparison with Western / institutional archives, Africans tend to collect and memorialize in quote unusual and quote unexpected ways that may escape our attention because they are so normal, right? What are some of the most memorable ways you've come across in your work?
First of all, let's keep the doctor thing aside, and before I go to the question, I thought that was beautiful what you said about the naming in you know where you come from, and you know within the Ashantis, you have this kind of naming structures that are related to days, you know. So if you hear somebody's called Kwajo, you know, he was born on a Monday. Kofi was born on a Friday. Kwame was born on a Saturday, and so on and so forth, you know. So these things already, you know, give meaning. The names give meaning and place you within a particular time, as in a day, but also places you within a particular geography, right? Which I'm very interested in. So I don't want to do comparisons between, you know, what Africans do and what others do. I don't really think it's my business. You know, I'm interested in the way, you know, people actually keep their memories. So some might do so by, you know, I mean, I don't know what normal is, but some do so by creating buildings in which they put certain pieces of papers or certain things. That is their business. It's fine, you know. The question is, how have we always done it, you know, and what are the new ways in which we can engage in keeping our memories? That is the base. The second thing is, if we're thinking of, you know, notions of heritage, for example, I did a class last year with my students on monuments and monumentality, which was thinking about monuments as spaces of memory. So how do you keep memory? What forms do they take? And there's a wide range of things that are there, things that we can consider as normal, as graveyards, you know, so the gravestone, or the family mask, or yes, the way you dance. You know, there is no dance form, especially on the African continent, that doesn't have meaning to it. I would dare say maybe everywhere else in the world. But it was, you know, so to think of performativity, you know, and you know, something I cited over and over again because it's very important in my thought trajectory is the work of Esiaba Irobi, you know, in this very important paper he wrote called The Philosophy of the Sea, in which he coined the concept of the body as a site of discourse, you know, which is to say that the body is the archive because it is a discursive space, you know, not only through, you know, the performances we do, the way we walk, the way we gesticulate, but especially in the places we come from, because of the body marks we have, the scars, you know, that we get when we are born, you know, because we belong to certain peoples because we were healed in a particular way, and so on and so forth. And these are all parts of the archive, you know. So I don't think it has to be within the frame of the abnormal, but it has to be within the frame of the normal. So that's it. I hope it answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you. Kelani, by design, the question is, your archival photographs are a finite resource. What is the future of your practice where personal archives are concerned? How do you intend to keep stretching their durability? That's a very brilliant phrasing, yeah.
So the question again, I mean, the durability of the material, is that what the question is?
I guess, yeah, it could be, yeah. But also, how do you create more of an archive for this practice, you know, in that sense? That's my own interpretation. I might be wrong.
I know, but you know, what I do today, these works keep opening up new things for me to do. I don't know what, to be sincere with you, I don't know what my next body of work will be. But there's a lot in this material that are worth visiting. For instance, in my next body of work, I'm planning to work on inheritance. I want to see, I want to really look at how people take the will of a disease serious. For instance, when someone died and have a will, what happened after his demise? How did the children follow up with what he wrote? I'll cite my own father as an example. You know, back then, when he died, he was quite a popular man and averagely okay. And he wrote in his will that before anybody can share the will, the last one, which she was about 1 or 2 years then, must clock 25 years. And that makes all the things he left behind obsolete, includes the machine, the printing machines. So, in that sense, you know, I don't know where this is taking me to. I might wake up tomorrow and start collecting materials from you, Emmanuel, or go to Dr. Bonaventure and search. I say, let's go to Cameroon, your family home. Let's see what you have. And again, I can go, as we said earlier, go and keep asking questions. That's one area that we've not touched, the memory. What's in your head? The older ones, the elderly people. You know, those are where the archives are. We're not tapping into that. You know, I remember that the last time I went home to meet, to ask questions from my mom. And when she started telling me things that happened between him and my father, I was really emotional. I got a lot of information from that. In things of about 50, 60, 70 years ago. And she keeps telling me, and that makes me, you know, I decided to, invite her into a space and do an interactive installation with one of our old typewriter machine. And she started typing her experience with my father. And that brought a lot of other information that nobody ever, who are you to complain about what your husband is doing to you? In Africa, women can't complain. You can't say anything. You have to bottle everything in. You have to soak in. And that gives her the opportunity. That's what she told me anyway, after the interactive installation, that gave her the opportunity to pour out all the things in her memory. Now, my question is, how many of us are doing that today? How far do you go to get this information? And that's one of the areas that I think we should take very seriously, especially in Africa, where people believe we don't document. We have all these things in some people's head. How far can we go to get them out? Then secondly, on the time limit of the work, I'll use the cases as a starting point. I just said a couple of minutes ago that the case is a continuous exploration. If in 30 years, the pictures in that case remains that way, it's a successful piece. And if in 50 years, you look at it and what you see is just a faint image, that makes it more successful. Because with that, I'm testing technology and I'm looking at the essence of time in all these things that we do today.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we might have to just ask one more question to start wrapping up. I don't think there are more questions from the audience, so I'll use the opportunity to ask one at least and start bringing this to a close. I mean, one of the things that Aud included in her brief, I would say, is the question of how personal archives can contribute to the making of the collective memory. I think we've sort of started touching on that, right? And to imagine this horizon that Kelani is speaking about, right? The horizon that, you know, one work leads one form of working with the archive leads to another form of working with the archive, and the interminable nature of that kind of movement. Or work or practice. So I don't want to preempt you. I want to sort of know from your own thinking how the ways in which we have conceptualized the archive this evening can contribute to what we can call collective memory, however precisely or vaguely we want to define that.
The collective is like a circle, you know, made up of many dots. And we are the dots. Our personal archives and personal memories make up the collective memory, especially if we share them. And that is it. So basically, in thinking together at this moment of what the archive could possibly be, what our personal archives are, and how we use them, and how we disseminate them, how we make those archives porous and let some people in and keep some out, which is something we have to do as well. We create that collective archive and that collective memory. That is it. In the kind of music we listen to, you know, so Sir Victor Uwaifo, you know, once saying, if you see Mami Water, never you run away. So what does that say about public memory, you know, and the public archive? So it says something about a place in which, you know, there is an idea of the Mami Water and there is a reaction to it. So in that, and when we dance to it, we also embody that. So I'm really interested in thinking about the effectiveness of the archive as a possibility of creating that public memory.
Thank you. Kelani.
So my answer is going to be really brief, but what I want to look at is I would like to answer to ask a question. When does the archive becomes collective? When do we refer it as collective? Because I believe archive is a personal thing. Either the family, that's actually the origin of archives. That's the origin inside an individual family. And then from my perspective as an artist, when I bring all this information together and put them together and show it to the public, and the results that I got when people look at them and find a connection to them. Imagine when you see an image of someone you've not met before, you didn't know, and reminds you of something. It takes you back, and you see that the image looks like your grandma, or looks like your kids or something. So that's the area that I'm looking at. So.
Yeah, but the archive is beyond a personal thing. That's why I mentioned the etymology of the word earlier. You know, the archae comes from government. The archaea is the public. You know, you know, it's meant to be a public thing. But you're right; it could start from the personal, but it's not limited to that.
I again agree with you. I agree with you with that. It could start from the personal, but I mean, can become a collective thing. I mean, let me just touch a bit on that aspect of who is responsible to take care of this archive. I was lucky to have a book from the family, which is the book should be like 70 or 80 years old, from my grandfather. And it's a book which I call a book of power. There's a lot in it. We have text on how to invoke some spiritual powers in it, how to cure some terrible diseases, how to travel spiritually. For instance, from here, if I want to go and visit doctor in Paris, in France now, I can travel and I will visit myself in your room. So that's, to me, it's wonderful. It's a kind of personal thing, but in a way, it connects all of us together. I remember it's my father, when he started learning how to print, when he started learning how to print, let me put it that way, he collected all those information from his father, put them down and bound them. Then he started asking his friends to add their own. So when you see the book, it's about 700 information on how to do this. Most of the things you see there will be how to make a love charm, how to talk to women, how to make money spiritually. And so that becomes a collective thing. It becomes something, they do as, as what we do today. It's more like they want to show powers. They want to let you know that they have all this power within them. And that makes it a collective thing. When we have 2, 3, 4, 5 people putting information together in a booklet or say a journal.
Thank you. I think on the note of the Book of Power, we can begin to wrap this up. It's been incredible to speak with both of you. I think we could go on and on to really think about what possibilities there are in the archive, whether personal or collective. And I'm glad that we have sort of even expanded the meanings that we began with, and spoken about archives as far beyond what is in institutions, to consider what could also be implicated in the body and even in the kitchen. And the image that I want to propose as an end is to just reiterate what Bonaventure has said: the collective is like a circle made up of many dots, and to think about the grain of sand, for instance, that contains the entire world. So that dot having its world entire, containing the world entire. What are the forms of archival practices that each individual artist, each individual writer can imagine and propose, just as Kelani has done? So thank you all. If there is no other addition, I think that's it from me. It's been a real pleasure, Kelani. It's been a real pleasure, Bonaventure, without the doctor. You're requested. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.